Hello, everybody. This is Matt Rascher, and thank you for viewing my research proposal presentation. Today, I'm going to talk to you about, you guessed it, my research proposal. Now, I know we've been waiting for this moment, like a kid waiting for Christmas morning, but before I get to the big show, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. So again, my name is Matt. You may remember me from such great classes like ITI 660 and ITI 662. My professional life started around the age of 16 or so. I've held several different jobs over the years, including everything from selling shoes to making donuts to working at an amusement park. And though I'm not currently in the classroom, I do teach an improv comedy class once a week, which has been a great opportunity for me to start kind of getting my feet wet in the world of teaching. Now, speaking of teaching, I've wanted to be one since I was a teenager, but the time was never quite right until a little over a year ago when I finally had this moment of existential despair. And I asked myself, what am I doing with my life? And I realized that I needed to make a change. So flash forward to a year and a half later, and here I am with my credential classes completed and one left to go for my master's degree. Very exciting. Which brings us back to the research proposal. So I'm going to just take a quick moment so I can share my screen. We can see this. It looks like it started at the end of the presentation, of course. So here we can see the research proposal video presentation for Nilsa J. Thorsos for ITI 664. Today's December 16th. And again, so this is about my research proposal, right? And so the nature and real purpose of this study is to dive deep into how nonverbal communication can affect the emotional health and development of EL students in the classroom. So the goal ultimately is to understand the connection between these two things much better by the end of the proposal and eventually by the end of the study itself. Now, my topic for my proposal is the effective use of nonverbal communication during EL instruction as a bridge to social emotional health and development. It really just rolls off the tongue, right? Essentially what I'm talking about is using nonverbal communication to help EL students feel more comfortable in the classroom. As the more comfortable an EL student, or any student for that matter, the better they'll be able to perform as they're not as preoccupied with as many things, drawing attention away from the classroom to study the lesson. So I want to investigate this topic because nonverbal communication is something I find incredibly interesting. And as someone who performs improv and acts on the stage, I have a deep appreciation for the nuances of our behavior and the effect that they can have, even when we don't realize it. Now, from the smallest furrowed brow to folded arms to how you carry yourself in the classroom and even the tone of your voice, all of these nonverbal gestures make a difference. And really, I want to see how much of a difference and what that difference ultimately means in relation to EL students and their ability to develop and prosper. Now, of course, when considering how I was going to find all of this out, I needed to put together some research questions. So these research questions focus on the topic of the research proposal itself, with the main question being, how does nonverbal communication during EL instruction act as a bridge to social emotional health and development? Furthermore, questioning my assumption of how comfortable a student feeling in a classroom affects their performance by asking, can a more comfortable and safe learning environment for EL students lead to increased oral and written English language development? I also asked, how will we measure engagement levels among participating students? So, there are only so many questions that we really want to look at. We have the one main question. We don't want to go more than 3 sub-questions. So I just put a couple on here. I have some different ones or some additional ones in my actual proposal itself. But ultimately, it goes back to the main research question of how does nonverbal communication act as a bridge to social emotional health and development. So really, that's the big thing that that we're trying to find. Now, of course, the significance of this study, it's again kind of going back to what I was talking about a moment ago. Nonverbal communication is something that is present in our everyday lives, whether we realize it or not. And it's that wiggle room there that really opens up the opportunity to see if more teachers were aware of their nonverbal communication, how much of an impact that would make in the classroom. So hopefully this study will show us that answer, which I think is, fairly significant. Moving on, now, I didn't just know everything about nonverbal communication and how it relates to EL students before I started this proposal. I actually had to do some research. So when I started to look into everything, I found that the information I was discovering or kind of coming across came really in one of two categories. So nonverbal communication in a general sense, and nonverbal communication as it relates to cultural and even EL students and the classroom itself. To start, nonverbal communication in the general sense can include everything from gestures to facial expressions, the tone of your voice, and even your posture or smell. What it does is provide context to the words we're speaking and ultimately reinforce or even contradict what we're saying. So all in all, it's a pretty powerful thing, just nonverbal communication in general. Now, the other portion of the research focused more on nonverbal communication as it relates to the EL world. So what we're looking at here is, while the nonverbal communication is the same in both areas of research, when you put it under the lens of coming from a different culture, it creates the potential for even more confusion and frustration on both sides, as what you think may be the right gesture ends up meaning something completely different. And if you're unaware of that, it can create a lot of chaos and, like I was saying, frustration in the classroom for both the students and the teachers. Now, all of this research is great, but I think it's time we get into the methodology portion of the proposal. So to start, we'll be looking at 2 ninth grade classes of EL students at the emerging proficiency level, taught the same lessons by the same teacher at the same school. Now, I'll go into more detail about this once I get to the procedures portion, but I wanted to give you an idea of who the participants were and kind of the setting for the study itself. Now, in order to do this, in order to actually do the study, we're going to need some instruments in which we're going to be using with these participants, with the students. So I'll be using a series of observations and interviews of the students in the study. These observations and interviews give me the information needed to really answer the biggest question of how nonverbal communication works in the classroom. In addition to these methods, I'm also planning on reviewing work done in the class to see a few things. So to see the difference between the beginning of the class to the end of it and how it compares to the other class in the study. Now, the data from the direct observations from both kind of interviews and the work the students do will be collected and summarized on a daily basis and analyzed to identify patterns of strength and success, as well as the opposite, so weakness and struggling, from the students. So the idea behind this is that finding those patterns and making conclusions from that information will tell us whether or not nonverbal communication is indeed a factor when it comes to helping EL students reach an emotionally healthy and safe space in their development and just in the classroom in general. So moving on to the actual procedure that I was mentioning a few moments ago. So in my study, the plan is to have 2 ninth grade classes, mostly containing EL students at the emerging level. So the emerging level, of course, being those students who are learning to use English for immediate needs, as well as beginning to understand and use academic vocabulary and other forms of academic language taught by the same teacher with the same lesson plan for both. With one class, this is the big difference. This is really what makes the study. So with one class using demonstrative nonverbal communication used in a fashion to attempt to create a welcoming and emotionally healthy environment. And in the other class, there will be as little nonverbal communication as possible. Now, this will be done over the course of 2 months, and once the first month is completed, the classes will be switched, with the one previously receiving the strong nonverbal communication now receiving little to none, and the one receiving very little now getting the strong nonverbal communication. The purpose behind switching after a month is twofold, right? So first, to see if the potential benefits gained from the strong nonverbal communication will carry over into an environment without it, and also to see if those who do not have those benefits will continue to struggle in spite of now receiving it. So again, with this plan, we're looking at 2 different sets of EL students who are going to be getting the nonverbal communication and not getting the nonverbal communication. So really what we want to see is if that nonverbal communication really makes that big of a difference in the classroom. And if putting kids that were in an environment that didn't have it into an environment that does have it, if that makes a difference. So that's really the exciting thing. That'll show us, that'll give us a lot of information, help to answer those questions, and kind of lead us down the path of what to do differently next time, what to look for, and how we can do this better. So that is just about it for this presentation. So thank you again for viewing. I hope this was as fun and informative for you as it was for me. Take care and have a great day, and thank you again.